Hi, my name's Mireille Levesque, and on Christmas Eve, my family taught me what it feels like to vanish while still sitting at the table. They laughed as they set a plate of hay in front of me, real hay, while everyone else ate roast and potatoes. No one blinked. Not my mother, not my father, not my sisters. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I just stood up and walked out into the snow. Later that night, my phone lit up with 101 missed calls. Why do they always panic only after the silence starts to speak for itself? The snow was coming down in soft, lazy spirals when I turned off the main road onto the narrow lane that led to my parents' house. The wipers brushed across the windshield, squeaking rhythmically, and I could see the familiar outline of the big white farmhouse standing at the end of the drive. Warm light glowed in every window. From a distance, it looked perfect, storybook perfect. Inside that glow, though, I knew the air was colder than the wind outside. By the time I parked and stepped out, the smell of wood smoke floated from the chimney. My boots crunched over the frozen gravel. For a second I thought about turning around, telling them something came up, and heading back to Albany. But it was Christmas Eve. You can't keep being the one who doesn't show up. So I brushed the snow from my coat, carried the gift bag, and climbed the porch steps. The front door opened before I could knock. My sister Callista stood there, flawless as always, her lipstick perfect, her smile brittle. "Well, look who decided to come," she said. Not a hug, not even a hello, just the usual little jab wrapped in polite sarcasm. Behind her, I heard Seraphine laugh, the high, artificial laugh of someone who'd been waiting to echo a joke. "Hi," I said, forcing warmth. "Merry Christmas." Dad was in the hallway, straightening his tie, though there was no reason to. He'd retired 3 years ago and still dressed like he was heading to the office. "You made it through the storm," he said without looking directly at me. "That's good." He took the wine from my hand and disappeared toward the kitchen. Mom appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. "You look tired, honey. I hope you didn't drive too fast in that weather." The words sounded caring, but her eyes had already moved to the pie Callista carried in. "You brought the dessert, right? Everyone's been waiting for that." I nodded. I did. No one asked how I'd been, how work was going, if I was still running my own design projects. The words caught in my chest, so I smiled, the same polite smile I'd practiced for years. Inside, the house looked just like the photos Mom sent every year, twinkling lights, garland wrapped around the banister, the smell of pine and cinnamon. The big dining table stretched across the living room, covered with her best linen and the old silver we weren't supposed to touch as kids. Every chair was taken, decorated with red bows. All except one.
Mine.
I paused, thinking maybe they'd forgotten to bring it from the kitchen. Mom noticed my glance and laughed lightly. "Oh dear, maybe we miscounted." She turned to Jude, Callista's 12-year-old son. "Honey, give Aunt Mira your booster seat from last year. She won't mind." Everyone laughed. It was supposed to be funny, I guess. I told myself to breathe. "I'll just stand for a bit," I said. "It's fine." The smile stayed on my face, but it hurt. Dinner started with the usual chaos. Callista managed everything like a stage manager, assigning who carved the turkey, who poured wine. I hovered near the end of the table, waiting for a space to open, pretending to adjust the napkins. The noise filled every corner. Overlapping chatter, the clink of glasses, the kind of laughter that feels rehearsed. I told myself not to notice that no one had looked me in the eye for more than 2 seconds since I'd arrived. Finally, plates were passed around. Thick slices of roast, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, all perfectly arranged. When the last dish reached me, I realized there wasn't an empty plate left. Mom turned toward the kitchen. "Callista, did we forget one for your sister?" "Oh, I've got it," Callista said quickly. She stepped away, heels clicking against the hardwood, and returned holding a small porcelain plate. It was delicate, floral, one of Mom's collectibles. And on it was straw, dried hay from the nativity scene centerpiece. She set it in front of me with a smirk. "Here's something organic for our little vegetarian." The room erupted in laughter. I could feel the heat crawling up my neck, my pulse in my ears. My nephew giggled until milk came out of his nose. Mom waved her hand. Oh, stop it, she knows it's a joke. A joke. I stared at the strands of straw, yellow and brittle, against the white china. My fork trembled slightly. My throat tightened. Funny, I managed to say. Really funny. Callista grinned. Come on, lighten up, Mimi. You used to have a sense of humor. I wanted to tell her I used to have a family too, but my voice didn't work. I looked at Dad. He was buttering his roll, pretending he hadn't seen anything. Seraphine reached for the gravy, still giggling. Time slowed. The noise blurred into a single tone. I felt detached, like watching the scene through a glass wall. Years of holidays, birthdays, graduations flashed through my mind. The moments I'd come home, tried to fit, brought gifts, lent money, kept quiet. All of it led to this. A plate of straw. Their laughter felt heavier than the snow outside. I placed the fork down carefully. The laughter faded when they saw my face. For a second, even Callista looked uncertain. Maybe they expected tears, an outburst, the usual explosion they could later label as overreacting. Instead, I smiled, small and steady. I think I've lost my appetite, I said softly. I folded my napkin, placed it beside the plate, and stepped back from the table. No one stopped me. The sound of chairs scraping and murmurs filled the space I left behind. I reached for my coat from the rack, though I didn't put it on. The air inside the house was thicker than the wind outside. When I opened the front door, the night met me like an old friend, cold but honest. Snowflakes landed on my hair and melted against my skin. Behind me, I could hear Callista's voice saying something like, "She'll get over it." I closed the door gently, letting their noise fade into the walls. The driveway was blanketed in white. My car sat under a thin sheet of snow, engine already cold. I brushed it off with my sleeve, not feeling my fingers. For a moment, I leaned on the door, staring at the warm light spilling from the windows. Inside, they would return to eating, laughing, telling stories. They would probably forget I had even been there. The thought didn't hurt as much as it should have. It just settled somewhere deep, like a stone sinking into water. I started the engine. The radio came on softly, a Christmas song half static. I didn't change it. As I pulled away, the tires crunched through fresh snow. In the rearview mirror, the farmhouse grew smaller, shrinking into a golden against the dark line of the trees. On the highway, the world was silent except for the hum of the car. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. First one notification, then another. I didn't look. Whatever they had to say could wait. For once, I didn't owe them a reaction. Somewhere between Montpelier and the state line, I exhaled for real. The tension in my chest loosened, leaving a strange kind of calm. Maybe that was what freedom sounded like. Not cheering or applause, but quiet snow falling on an empty road. The road curved, headlights slicing through the white. The house disappeared completely behind me. I whispered to no one, "Merry Christmas." The words didn't taste bitter. They just floated into the air and vanished. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove, letting the silence fill the space they had left in me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was heading somewhere that belonged to me, even if I didn't know where that was yet. When I reached the main highway, I slowed, glanced one last time into the mirror. Their lights were gone. Only the dark horizon and snow remained. I smiled faintly. That was the night they learned silence could be louder than any scream. The road stretched on behind me like a memory I didn't need anymore. I didn't look back, not when I passed the first gas station on the edge of town, not when I crossed the old bridge where we used to throw coins for wishes that never came true. By the time I reached Albany, the sky had gone from ink black to that early gray just before morning fully wakes up. The heater in the car had finally done its job, and my fingers had stopped shaking, though I wasn't sure it was from the cold or from everything else. I pulled into Kalen's driveway just after 6. His porch light was still on. I didn't knock. I let myself in with the key he gave me 2 years ago when I helped him repaint the inside of his place. Said it was just in case, though we both knew what that meant. Some people are better at holding space for you than your own blood. Kalen was already up, sitting on the couch with his laptop open and a mug of something steaming in his hand. He looked up as I closed the door behind me. You all right? I nodded, dropped my bag by the door, and sat on the opposite end of the couch. My dress clung to me like a second skin, wrinkled and worn from the hours I'd spent in it. I didn't bother explaining. He didn't ask again. Instead, he passed me the extra blanket folded over the armrest. The first notification buzzed on my phone just as I tucked the blanket under my legs. I didn't look. I waited for the second one. Then the third. By the time I reached for it, there were 22 missed calls and 12 unread messages. Mom had written, "Where are you? Then you're scaring people." Ruben had texted once, "Call me now." Callista had sent nothing, which said everything. I clicked on the photos in the family group chat. A selfie at the table. All smiles. All plates full. Except for mine. My chair was cropped out of the frame, the corner of the table barely visible like a smudge. The caption read, "Grateful Hearts. Holiday Love." I turned off the screen and laid the phone face down. Sometime around sunrise, I finally slept. But my mind didn't. It rewound. Earlier that evening, when I'd first arrived, the driveway was still coated in slush. I'd parked around the corner because the main spaces had already been claimed by Callista's SUV and Lucian's new truck. I carried my homemade cranberry walnut tart with one hand and balanced the gift bag with the other. I remember the way the house looked through the frost, like something pulled out of a magazine. Wreaths on every window. The smell of cinnamon and clove in the air. I told myself it was worth it to show up early, to help Mom prep before everyone else arrived. Before I could even take off my coat, Seraphine walked in from the kitchen holding a stack of dirty dishes and said, "You're here early. Help me finish these?" No hello. No smile. Just instruction. Like she'd been waiting for someone to delegate to. I set the tart down on the counter. Sure. We moved in silence. She handed me a sponge like it was a weapon, and I stood at the sink washing remnants of cookie dough and roast drippings from the pans they'd clearly already used. I remember thinking, is this the cost of entry? Show up early, earn your seat. When the front door opened behind us and guests started to arrive, no one greeted me. I was still in the kitchen, still wearing my coat. Jude ran past shouting, "They're here." Seraphine yelled back, "Use the side door," and then turned to me. "Careful with that tray. Mom wants to reuse it." I didn't respond. In the living room, I finally pulled my coat off and stepped into the crowd. A man I didn't recognize, tall, mid-40s, probably a cousin's friend, was talking to Callista. His eyes drifted to me. Then he turned to her and asked, loud enough for me to hear, "Is she the nanny? Or housekeeper?" Callista smirked. Mom sipped her wine. Dad looked at the fireplace like it owed him something. I smiled. "No," I said, steady as stone. "I'm just not part of the photo album." There was a beat of silence. Then laughter, soft, awkward, the kind that fills space rather than means anything. The man apologized. I waved it off. What else could I do? Kalen was across the room, near the tree. He didn't laugh. He didn't pretend it was okay. He just looked at me, eyes narrowed, like he was finally seeing what I'd stopped trying to explain years ago. Later, while setting the second wave of dishes into the dishwasher, I overheard them. I hadn't meant to listen, but the walls in that house were never thick enough to protect anyone's dignity. Seraphine to Callista. "Honestly, I'm glad she's still single. Can you imagine her passing all that whatever it is to a child?" Callista laughed. Her real laugh, the one that only showed up when she forgot to perform. It'd be tragic. My hands were in the sink. I held a glass under the faucet, letting the water overflow until it burned. Then I turned it off, dried my hands slowly. No rush. My chest felt empty, not aching. But my jaw had locked into something I hadn't noticed before. That was the moment. Not the straw on the plate. Not the lack of a chair. This. The unfiltered truth they shared when they thought I couldn't hear. That I was broken. A cautionary tale. An object of pity and comedy all at once. I looked at myself in the reflection of the microwave door. Hair pulled back, eyes dull, posture too tight. I will stay, I whispered in my head. I will not speak, but I will not serve them anymore. So I wiped the counters one last time, dropped the towel beside the sink, and walked back into the living room. Kalen saw me first. His brow lifted, almost like he expected me to vanish. I gave him a single nod. Not for reassurance. Not for comfort. Just confirmation. I'm still here. I'm done playing their version of me. Let's see what happens now. The sound of voices rolled over the table like soft thunder, silverware clinking against plates, laughter rising and falling. I sat in my chair again, my body calm, but my mind somewhere between the present and a place years away. The wine glasses caught the glow of the candles, their reflections dancing on the white linen. From where I sat, I could see everyone, Callista at the head, Mom beside her, Dad cutting his turkey with the same precision he used when carving his career out of other people's effort. Everything about that scene felt staged. It always did. Callista stood, glass in hand, the queen of the evening. To resilience, she said, voice polished as if rehearsed in a mirror. And to family, to the traditions that make us who we are. Everyone clapped. A few murmured, "Here, here," like a loyal audience. I smiled faintly. She loved that word, tradition. It was her favorite weapon. Every manipulation she pulled, every unkind thing she said, she wrapped in it like a bow. Tradition meant we all had to play our parts, and mine was to sit quietly, the proof of her charity. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Kalen's name lit up on the screen. Breathe. They're not worth the broken heart. I typed, then deleted a reply. Instead, I slipped the phone away and kept watching. I'd started doing that more lately, watching instead of reacting. There was power in silence once you learned how to wield it. The dinner carried on, and for a few minutes, I almost fooled myself into thinking I could just float through it. But then Dad leaned back in his chair, wine glass half full, nostalgia warming his voice. "Remember that summer when someone nearly burned down the kitchen?" he said, laughing. "What a wild one you were, Mimi." Laughter erupted around the table, the kind that feeds on itself. Seraphine leaned forward, eyes bright. She was always trouble, crying, dramatic, a total fire hazard. The memory hit like a photograph dropped in acid. I stared at my plate, the mashed potatoes turning to paste under my fork. I was 9. The oven timer had gone off. The smell of smoke had filled the kitchen. But it wasn't me who left the roast inside too long. It was Seraphine. She had cried, terrified, and I'd stepped forward when Mom stormed in demanding answers. I said I did it, because back then I thought loyalty meant protection. I'd been grounded for 2 weeks. My allowance taken, my art supplies confiscated. Seraphine got ice cream the next day for being honest. Now, decades later, they still told the story, but this time it was a comedy. I felt the sting travel through me, not as sharp pain, but as something heavier, duller, an old bruise pressed too long. It's always been this way, I thought. They tell the story, laugh, and I'd nod along because that's what was expected. Their version of history was clean, convenient, always funny. My truth didn't matter because it never fit the family narrative. I remembered how I'd stopped speaking for weeks after that fire. How the silence had terrified them for about 3 days, until they got bored of caring. Then they decided I was sensitive. That label stuck like glue. Callista reached for her wine. "Mimi, you really were something, always keeping us on our toes." Her tone carried the same sweetness as a knife coated in sugar. Mom chimed in, slurring slightly. "Oh, you were all so different." Seraphine was the steady one, such a planner. Married by 28, good career, a real doer. She turned to me, her eyes soft but sharp. "And sweetie, you're still finding your path, right?" I forced a smile. "Something like that." Dad added, "You always were a free spirit. Never could pin you down. You didn't want what the rest of us had." I looked at him. His words sounded kind to anyone who didn't know better. But beneath that compliment was the same judgment as always. You chose wrong. You lived wrong. You never measured up. Mom laughed. She's our little wonder. I bit down gently on my tongue to keep from speaking. Inside, a thought formed like smoke. It's not that I didn't want what you had. It's that I didn't want to become you. I reached for my water. It was room temperature, slightly metallic from the tap. It helped keep my hands busy. They kept talking. I stopped listening. My eyes drifted to the window. Snow was still falling outside, covering the yard in a thin silver sheet. The Christmas lights glowed faintly through the frost. For a second, I imagined opening that window, letting the cold air rush in just to shock everyone into silence. But I didn't move. Instead, I looked around the table, studying their faces. Callista, always perfect, always rehearsed. Seraphine, smiling too wide, desperate for attention she pretended to hate. Mom, content as long as no one disturbed her illusion. Dad, half here, half gone, loyal only to the absence of conflict. And me, still sitting there, invisible, holding back words that would burn the whole house down. I took another sip of water and thought about all the milestones they'd missed. The business I'd started and kept alive without a dime from them. The night I'd driven 3 hours to bring Mom groceries when she said she was too sick to shop, only to find her out with her church friends. The time Dad called asking for help with his mortgage paperwork, not realizing I'd already done it once before, when he almost lost the house. I remembered each moment I'd shown up, and each time they forgot I was ever there. Seraphine was talking again, something about her vacation in Florida. I caught pieces of it. The water was crystal clear, the kids loved it. You should travel more, Mimi, it might calm you down. Calm me down. That phrase hit like a match against dry wood. I smiled. Slowly, deliberately. Funny, I said, my voice soft enough to force them to lean in. You all tell the same stories every year. Maybe we should just record them and play them back next time. Save you the effort. Dad chuckled uncertainly. Well, that's what family's for. To remember the good times. I raised my glass, the reflection of the candlelight flickering across the water surface. To perfect memories, I said. May we always remember them exactly as we prefer. For a second, the entire room froze. The hum of conversation died. A fork scraped a plate somewhere near the end of the table, shrill as a scream. Then Callista laughed, high and hollow. You're so dramatic, Mimi. I learn from the best, I said, smiling back. Mom shifted in her chair. All right, let's keep things cheerful, she said too brightly. I leaned back, still smiling. Cheerful's my specialty. But inside, something shifted. Something I hadn't felt in years. A kind of cold clarity that wasn't sadness or anger, but both. I realized I was done trying to belong. I wasn't in their stories. I was the shadow around them. But shadows know how to outlast the light. As the dinner moved on, their laughter returned, softer this time, uncertain. I stayed quiet, letting the sound wash over me. In my mind, I drew a line thin, invisible, permanent. On one side, the people I used to call family. On the other, the woman I was becoming. When the plates were cleared and the next course was served, I lifted my glass again. Not to toast, not to speak, just to feel the weight of it. The fork scraped again, the same awful sound. To me, it was the sound of something breaking, quietly, without anyone noticing. And that's when I knew, from that moment on, I wouldn't try to fit in anymore. I'd simply watch. From the outside, looking in. The room had quieted after my little toast, though no one wanted to admit it. The air felt heavier than before, as if the words I'd spoken had landed on the table like a thin layer of frost. I stayed seated, my hands wrapped around my glass, letting the chill of it bleed into my fingers. Conversation began to trickle back in, soft, polite, meaningless. My family was excellent at that, filling silence with noise that meant nothing. Callista was the first to speak. All right, everyone, she said brightly, like a hostess reclaiming control. Before dessert, Mom has something for all of us. I looked at Mom. She was already reaching into a decorative basket near the tree, her lips painted in the same deep red she'd worn every Christmas since I could remember. Just a small gesture, she said. Family cards. Tradition. Of course, tradition. Everything in this house revolved around that word. I could almost hear the capital letter in her tone. Jude, Callista's boy, ran to help her. He was 12 now, tall for his age, and already carrying the same air of quiet entitlement as his mother. He reached into the basket and began passing out the envelopes, each one neatly printed in cursive. I sat quietly, watching him move around the table. The cards went first to the favorites, Callista, then Seraphine, then Dad. Each person smiled, thanked Mom, opened their envelopes with predictable delight. I waited, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd gotten it right this time. My name wasn't hard. It was unusual, sure, but not impossible. When Jude reached me, he squinted at the card in his hand. This one's for Luella? He looked uncertain. That's you, right? My chest tightened. Let me see, I said, taking it gently. The envelope read, in Mom's elegant handwriting, to Luella, the kind spirit of our home. Merry Christmas. I smiled. The same smile I'd used since childhood, the kind that protected everyone else from the sound of my breaking. Guess so, I said. Jude shrugged. We probably meant you. Then he moved on. No one corrected him. No one apologized. I turned the card over in my hand. The paper was thick, expensive. Mom's signature glistened in gold ink at the bottom. Luella. It wasn't even close. I could feel Callista's eyes on me. She probably thought I was overreacting inside, making something out of nothing. Maybe that's what they'd say later, that I was sensitive, that it was just a mix-up. But I knew better. In this house, forgetting was never accidental. Thank you, I said softly, setting the card beside my plate. Seraphine opened hers next. Mom, this is sweet. Look, mine says, to our shining light. She turned the card toward everyone, smiling like a model in an ad. Mom beamed. Well, you've always brightened the room, dear. Callista's card said our anchor. Dad said, our strength. Mine, Luella, didn't say anything that belonged to me. Kalen caught my eye across the table. He looked puzzled, then angry. I shook my head slightly, a silent don't. He looked away, lips pressed together. They moved on quickly, the moment erased as easily as my name had been. Dessert came out, store-bought cheesecake, and the cranberry tart I'd made. They placed mine at the far end of the table, untouched. Mom announced, let's keep things light. No more serious talk tonight. Too late for that. As they passed slices of cheesecake, I found myself staring at the candlelight flickering across the silverware. The sound of laughter returned, distant and hollow. I'd learned that in this house, memory was performance. Even kindness had a script. Mireille. My name wasn't common, but it was deliberate. My grandmother had chosen it. French for wonder. She used to tell me, a name holds your spirit. Guard it. She'd survived war, famine, and losing 2 sons, yet she never let the world rename her. And here I was, Luella, the family ghost who showed up to wash dishes and disappear from photographs. I traced the edge of the card with my thumb. Every Christmas, they found new ways to remind me I was optional. Misspelled, misremembered, misplaced. I wondered if they even knew what my name meant anymore, or if it was easier for them not to. Seraphine's voice cut through my thoughts. Oh, speaking of names, does anyone remember that woman from church, Jen? You know, the one who ran off with her boss? She laughed, sipping her wine. Total disaster. Mom giggled. I do. She was like the Mireille of their family. The laughter that followed was immediate, effortless, practiced. I looked straight at her. That's funny, I said evenly. I thought I was your family. The room fell quiet. The only sound was the faint clinking of a spoon against a coffee cup. Mom's smile faltered. Oh, honey, it was just a joke. Of course, I said. Everything is. A few seconds stretched into forever. Then Dad cleared his throat. So, Callista, how's work? The subject changed. The laughter resumed. My words dissolved into the hum of conversation, like they'd never existed. I sat back, breathing slowly, letting the silence inside me harden into something solid. They'd spent years sanding down my edges, turning me into someone who fit neatly into their narrative. Someone small, safe, forgettable. But right then, I felt every piece of myself coming back, sharp and clear. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. Anger was too simple for what lived in my chest now. It was understanding, the kind that left no room for hope. In my mind, I saw my grandmother again, the woman who carried my name through everything. I imagined her hands dusted with flour, her face lined but kind. She used to hum when she baked, low and steady, a sound that meant peace. She would have hated what they'd turned my name into, a punchline served between dessert courses. I pressed my palms together under the table. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me fold. Kalen glanced over again. This time, I met his eyes. I didn't need to say anything. My face said enough. He nodded slightly, understanding that something had shifted. The evening dragged on, conversations overlapping like tangled wires. Callista boasted about a new client. Seraphine told another story about her children's accomplishments. Mom reminisced about better times. Every sentence felt like a layer of dust settling over me. I reached for my coffee cup, tracing the rim with my finger. In my head, I whispered to myself, "Keep laughing. You have no idea how much this silence costs." The words were steady, almost gentle, but they carried the weight of every year I'd spent swallowing the noise. As plates were cleared, I watched the people around me move in practiced rhythm, pretending everything was fine. Maybe it was for them. Maybe it always would be. But for me, something had cracked open that couldn't be closed again. For the first time, I didn't feel small sitting at that table. I felt separate, untouched, watching from the edge of their world, where truth had a place to breathe. The conversation faded to a blur, laughter dissolving into background static. My heart slowed. My breathing matched the rhythm of the snow still falling outside. They thought this was dessert, the end of the evening. But for me, it was only the beginning of the reckoning. The plates had been cleared, and the hum of conversation softened into a lazy background murmur. Candlelight shimmered against half-empty glasses, and I could smell the faint bitterness of burnt sugar from the cheesecake crust. My mother loved a grand finale. In her mind, every gathering needed a perfect ending. Tonight would be no different. What she didn't know was that I had my own ending planned. The moment hung still for a beat, and I let my thoughts drift back to 2 days earlier, the night the invitation finally reached my inbox. It was late, almost midnight, when I opened my laptop and saw it sitting there, sandwiched between store coupons and spam. Subject line: Christmas dinner, RSVP. The timestamp showed it had been sent at 11:42 the night before. Everyone else had replied hours earlier. I'd written to Mom right away. Just got this. Did you send it late? Her answer came 10 minutes later. Oh, sweetheart, must have gone to spam. These things happen. Can't rely on technology, you know. I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the laptop. It wasn't a mistake. Not with her. My mother used "these things happen" the way a magician uses smoke, something to cover the trick, so no one looked too closely. I booked the trip anyway. Out of habit. Out of a need to prove that I still showed up, even when they didn't want me to. Now, sitting at the table, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. The lights flickered as Callista stood up, clinking her spoon against her glass. She wore that same crisp confidence she'd had since high school, the kind that made everyone else small just by proximity. Before we wrap up tonight, she began, I just want to say how proud I am of all of us. For sticking together, for growing, for forgiving the past. The words were smooth, hollow, rehearsed. Forgiving the past. It rolled off her tongue so easily, as though the past were a piece of old furniture you could polish and forget. Kalen leaned closer to me, his voice barely a whisper. You don't have to let them finish the story for you. I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I had the energy for confrontation. But his words stayed with me, ringing somewhere deep, waiting. When Callista finished, everyone applauded politely. The spotlight of expectation shifted, like an unseen cue. My father's voice cut through the noise. "Mireille," he said, smiling as though we were strangers making small talk at an airport lounge. "You've been quiet. Got anything to share with the family?" Every head turned. For the first time in years, I didn't freeze. I stood, slowly, deliberately, letting my chair scrape against the hardwood. "Sure," I said. The word surprised even me. Steady, calm, absolute. Callista blinked, half smiling. "Well, this is new." I took a breath. I had something happen this month. My work, one of my designs, was featured in a gallery in New York. It's my first solo exhibit. A pause stretched between us. I pulled out my phone, swiped to the picture of the invitation, and held it out for them to see. My pulse was quiet but strong, like a drumbeat beneath the skin. "It's called Lines of Light." They used one of my pieces for the main poster. For a second, there was silence. Then Seraphine laughed lightly, her voice dripping with a kind of pity that sounded like perfume, sweet at first, suffocating later. "That's cute. They're letting amateurs submit now." Mom chuckled. "Oh, don't be cruel. She's always been creative." Callista lifted her glass, not looking at me. "That's wonderful, Mireille." The words came out slow, deliberate, lifeless. The air went still. I put my phone down beside my plate. My throat didn't tighten this time. It loosened. I smiled, not because I felt like it, but because I wanted to see how the expression looked when it didn't hide pain. "It's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to be proud of me. I am." The quiet that followed was heavier than any insult. I could feel it, thick and metallic, pressing against my skin. Reuben cleared his throat, his favorite way of retreating. "Well," he said, "that's nice." Mom poured more wine. "To creativity, then." Callista raised her glass again, but her hand trembled just enough for me to notice. I met her eyes. "Next time you forget to send an invitation on time," I said, keeping my tone polite, almost kind, "don't bother sending it at all." The fork in Mom's hand froze halfway to her mouth. "And," I continued, glancing at Callista, "if you're still curious about what amateurs can do, you might want to stay tuned." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. No one spoke. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, cutting through the silence. Kalen's gaze met mine. He gave a small nod, not approval, just acknowledgement. Finally. Dad shifted in his seat. "No need to get dramatic, honey. It's Christmas." I laughed quietly. "Oh, don't worry, Dad. I wouldn't ruin the show." Mom forced a smile, her eyes darting to Callista, as if to ask, "What now?" Callista smiled back, but it was too wide, too thin. The tension clung to the room like humidity before a storm. Seraphine reached for the dessert platter again, pretending not to notice. "I think," I said, sitting back down, "that's enough sharing for tonight." The conversation sputtered, then stumbled into new topics: weather, travel, Jude's grades. But the rhythm never recovered. Every laugh that followed sounded cautious, checked, like people testing the air after lightning. I sipped my water and let the taste of it wash away the bitterness on my tongue. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required caring, and I had spent that currency long ago. What remained was something quieter: resolve. I watched them continue the performance, each person stepping carefully through their roles. Mom, the gracious matriarch; Dad, the detached diplomat; Seraphine, the charmer; Callista, the golden one. The play went on, but the audience, me, had stopped believing in the story. After dessert, Mom rose to gather the plates. "Kalen," she said brightly, "you're so good at organizing things. Mind helping?" He smiled politely. "Actually, I'm fine right here." It was small, but the look on her face was worth it. For once, she didn't get what she wanted. As the table emptied, I stayed seated. Callista passed behind me, setting her hand on my shoulder briefly, the gesture stiff as plastic. "That was brave," she murmured. I turned my head, meeting her gaze. It wasn't bravery, I said. It was overdue. She blinked, smiled thinly, and walked away. When the house began to quiet, only the ticking clock remained. I looked around at the remnants of the night. Crumbs on the tablecloth, lipstick marks on half-empty glasses, the gold-inked place cards scattered like fallen leaves. The perfect picture of what my family called togetherness. Kalen stood near the doorway, coat in hand. "You okay?" he asked softly. I nodded. "Better than ever." He hesitated, then said, "They'll call you dramatic." "They already do." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Good. Means they're scared." When he left, I lingered a little longer, watching the candle flames shrink to nothing. I wanted to leave them exactly as they were, burned out, quiet, harmless. As I walked to my car, the night air hit me, sharp and clean. I glanced back at the house one last time. Through the window, I could see them moving slowly, their gestures tired, their faces unreadable. Maybe they were wondering what had just happened. Maybe they thought I'd come crawling back to smooth things over, like always. They didn't realize the show had ended for me hours ago. That was the night I stopped performing for them. Inside the car, the silence felt heavy but not empty. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady, calm. I knew there would be fallout, texts, calls, excuses, but none of it mattered anymore. The script was changing, and this time, I was the one holding the pen. I walked out of the dining room not in anger, but in something quieter, sharper. You know that moment when you're no longer waiting for an apology, a thank you, or even recognition? That's where I was. It's a strange kind of freedom, really. You don't expect anything, and suddenly every lie they tell themselves doesn't touch you anymore. The hallway was dim. The sound of voices behind me grew faint as I stepped into the living room. The tree lights blinked in slow, deliberate patterns, red, green, gold. I stared at the boxes underneath, each wrapped perfectly in Mom's signature style. Crisp corners, matching ribbons, color-coded name tags. Order, control, illusion. Time for gifts. Callista called from the other room, like she was hosting a corporate Christmas party. You could almost hear the bullet points in her tone. I didn't want to go back in, but I did. Not because I needed to be there, but because they needed to see me not flinch. Everyone gathered around the tree. Jude plopped down on the floor like he owned it, which, to be fair, he almost did. Most of the gifts were for him. New gaming console, brand-name sneakers, 2 jackets, because one wasn't enough, apparently. Callista sat poised near the center, her legs crossed like a pageant queen. She directed the flow. Okay, let's start with Dad's gift. Reuben leaned forward to unwrap the largest box. It was a bottle of bourbon, expensive, aged. From Seraphine. Leora clapped like it was the highlight of her year. I watched, hands resting in my lap, heart beating steady. Then came my turn. Or, at least, it should have been. Jude picked up the small square box I'd wrapped in brown paper and twine. I'd made the frame myself, hand-sanded oak, a restored photo of Dad and me when I was 5. He was holding me on his shoulders. We both looked happy. Whole. Jude handed it to Reuben. This one's from Callista and me. I blinked. Callista smiled sweetly. We worked so hard on that, right, Jude? Jude hesitated, looking down at the box. Yeah. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Reuben peeled away the wrapping, smiled wide when he saw the picture. Look at this. I'd forgotten we even had this photo. Callista leaned in, touched his arm. I had it cleaned up. You know, digitally restored. Thought it might mean something. I stared at her hand on his arm. I stared at the way her smile held. I stared until my vision blurred. No one asked if it was mine. No one asked how it had been found, cleaned, or printed. Because they didn't want to ask. That would make it real. I sat perfectly still as Reuben hugged Callista, thanking her for her thoughtfulness. Everyone clapped. No one said my name. My hands trembled in my lap, hidden under the edge of the tablecloth. Kalen caught my eye from across the room. His brows furrowed just enough for me to know he saw it all. But I gave him a quick shake of my head. Not now. The night wore on. Conversation picked back up. The lights on the tree blinked on rhythm. The fire crackled. And then it was time for dessert. I'd brought the cranberry walnut torte, my grandmother's recipe, handwritten in faded ink, passed down only to me. I'd spent all afternoon baking it, balanced the flavors carefully, baked it to the exact golden brown. It sat at the far end of the table now, next to the store-bought cheesecake Mom had grabbed as a backup. Because in this house, my efforts always needed a safety net. Seraphine took the first bite. I watched her face for any flicker, anything. She chewed slowly, then shrugged. "It's a little tart," she said loudly, reaching for the cheesecake. "I think I'll stick with Costco next time." Laughter. Not uproarious. Not cruel. Just dismissive. The kind of laughter that doesn't even realize it's stepping on someone. I stood up. Quietly. No dramatic push of the chair. No glass-shattering shout. I walked to the far end of the table, picked up the plate holding the rest of my torte, held it carefully, steadily. No one said a word. And then, in one smooth motion, I walked it to the trash can in the kitchen, lifted the lid, dropped it in. The clang of the plate against plastic was the only sound in the house. I turned back around. Kalen had stood halfway out of his chair, but I met his gaze again and nodded. "Still not yet." I walked back into the room and stopped just short of the table. "I brought something valuable tonight," I said. My voice didn't waver. "You gave it a new name, a different flavor, and then threw it back at me." Callista opened her mouth. I kept talking. "So I'll help you out. Next time, I won't bring anything at all." Silence. That kind of silence that makes your ears ring. That makes time feel like it's stalling. I didn't wait for applause or apologies. I didn't need a response. I walked out. As I passed the hallway mirror, I caught my reflection. My spine was straight. My expression unreadable. For once, I didn't see the quiet girl who begged to be let in. I saw someone they'd underestimated for too long. Kalen followed a few seconds later. He didn't speak until we reached the front door. "You okay?" I nodded. "I'm not broken. Just done." He held the door open. I stepped out into the cold. The wind hit my face like a second truth. Inside, I could hear someone say my name finally, but it was too late now. When I stepped back into the living room, I could feel the atmosphere trying to reassemble itself, as if nothing had cracked. Leora was placing fresh coasters under everyone's drinks like she could smooth out tension with cork and felt. Ruben returned to his chair, flipping through the TV menu, pretending to look for a holiday movie. No one dared mention what had just happened in the kitchen. That's how my family worked. Ignore the fracture, paint over it with small talk. But I could feel it, the shift. They weren't ready to let me leave strong. Not yet. Callista clapped her hands twice, perky and in control. "Game time, everyone. We're not skipping the trivia." I made the questions myself, so no cheating. A few groans followed, mostly from the kids, but most of the adults obliged. Chairs were rearranged, the coffee table pushed aside, and snacks refilled. The game was always the same: family trivia. Lighthearted questions about vacations, childhood pranks, birthday mishaps. At least for them. Teams were formed quickly and, predictably. Callista paired with Seraphine. Ruben joined Lucien. Jude was allowed to sit with the adults this time. And me? "She can keep score," Ruben said, handing me a notepad. "You've always been good with details, haven't you, sweetie?" It wasn't a suggestion. It never was. I sat on the edge of the couch, the notepad balanced on my lap like a substitute for inclusion. Kalen hovered beside me for a beat longer than necessary. He knew. He always knew. But I gave him that look again, the one that said, "Let it be." Not yet. The game started with laughter and teasing. "What year did Dad fall into the lake on our camping trip?" "Who broke Grandma's vase and blamed it on the cat?" Every answer was a performance. Every memory a curated highlight reel. I remember the lake trip, not for Ruben's fall, but because I'd gotten heatstroke that same day and no one noticed until I threw up in the tent. I remembered the vase. It had been Callista. I took the blame because I was 7 and terrified of her glare. I tried answering one question out loud, just to see. "Florida, 1998, I said, responding to a question about a family vacation. No one looked at me. Jude walked over, placed a pen beside my notepad, and mumbled, "They said you'd keep track." I nodded,
Took the pen.
scribbled the score, though no one checked it. The laughter swelled, a soundtrack to my slow erasure. I didn't disappear. I was still in the room, still breathing the same air. But it was like I'd turned a glass, see-through, reflective, fragile. Exile doesn't always come with banishment, I thought. Sometimes, it just stops including your name. And then came the real blow. It happened the way all real betrayals do, quietly, off stage, dressed like a harmless conversation. I went to the kitchen for more water. They didn't notice. I took my time, letting the quiet of the hallway press in. That's when I heard it, Ruben's voice, low but clear. After the refinancing, he was saying, we've decided to leave the Montpelier house to Callista and Lucien. They've been the rocks after all.
Silence.
Then Mom's soft, agreeing hum. Lucien asked something about taxes. Callista laughed and said, well, I did manage most of the paperwork for the last 3 years. I leaned against the wall, my hand tightening around the glass in my grip. I didn't need to ask for clarification. The Montpelier house, the same one I helped save 5 years ago when Dad was too proud to admit they were behind on payments. The same house I'd refinanced under my name, so they wouldn't lose it. That house. So I was the loan, I whispered. And now that the debt's clear, I'm expendable. I backed away from the hallway. Quiet steps, deliberate breath. The water in the glass trembled. I didn't cry. Not then. Instead, I remembered what my grandmother once told me. When they take your name, take their power. I walked through the side entrance and stepped out into the cold. The yard was blanketed in white, the porch lights casting long, ghostly shadows. I sat on the wooden step, pulled out my phone. I typed, "Do you still have the documents from 2018? Kaylin responded less than a minute later, "Yes." I replied, "Tomorrow." Then slid the phone back into my pocket.
No dramatic monologue. No confrontation.
Just planning. Inside, the trivia game was still going. I could hear Seraphine's voice from the living room. Remember when Mimi tried to make that gingerbread house and it collapsed before the frosting dried? Laughter again. My name. Still useful. Still funny.
Still theirs to twist.
I stared at the sky. The stars didn't flicker, just watched, like I was watching now. From the outside.
Calm. Poised.
They had made a mistake. They taught me to survive in silence, to smile through insult, nod through dismissal. And now, they didn't know what I looked like without apology. The evening wound down. Lights dimmed. Guests gathered coats. Mom offered hugs at the door. I stayed on the steps, letting the cold bite through my sleeves. Ruben walked past me on his way to his car, didn't say a word, didn't even pause.
Fine.
Kaylin found me there 10 minutes later. You good? He asked, standing just far enough not to crowd me. I nodded. You sure? I'm not disappearing, I said. I'm collecting. Collecting? Everything they owe me. He didn't ask what that meant. I appreciated that about him. When we left, I didn't say goodbye. Didn't turn around. They wanted me erased. But they signed the deed years ago. I woke before the sun, not because of nerves, but because my body had decided, on its own, it was done sleeping. The apartment was silent, the kind of stillness that only exists early in the morning, before the world gets loud. I slid out of bed, walked barefoot to the kitchen, and turned on the coffee maker. No rush, no noise, just the hum of purpose. While the coffee brewed, I opened my laptop and sat at the small dining table by the window. The sky was still dim, a soft gray curtain waiting to be pulled open. I didn't need music or news or distraction. What I needed was already saved in a folder labeled 2018 Financial Docs. I clicked it open. There it was, the scanned title transfer. My full name typed at the top, legal and final, black ink on white paper. It hadn't changed. No one had questioned it, because no one had remembered. Property owner, Mireille Levesque. I stared at the line for a few seconds longer than necessary, as if I needed it to confirm my own existence. They had forgotten, but the paper hadn't. I poured myself a mug of coffee, black, no sugar, and brought it back to the table. The bitterness was grounding. Necessary. I opened a blank email and began typing. Subject: regarding this year's holiday gathering.
Body.
Please refrain from using the Montpelier property for any future events. As legal owner, I no longer grant permission. This includes next weekend's anniversary dinner. I attached the deed. No explanation. No threats. Just truth. And then I hit send. For the first time in years, I didn't second-guess myself. The inbox pinged a second later. Then again. Then again. 6 missed calls from Leora within 10 minutes. 2 voicemails.
I didn't listen to them.
I didn't need to. Then came the text from Callista. What are you doing? And another. You're going to destroy everything. Everything? They thought their version of everything was worth protecting. But their everything had never included me. I left the phone face down and got in the shower. Let the steam do what apologies never did, loosen the tension in my back. By the time I stepped out, toweled off, and dressed, the number of calls had doubled. At noon, I checked my phone again. 43 missed calls, 12 texts, 5 voicemails. By 3 p.m., I turned on Do Not Disturb. By 6, the number read 101 missed calls. I took a photo of the screen and saved it in the same folder as the deed. Kalen arrived at 7 with Thai food and 2 cold beers. He didn't knock, just let himself in with the key I'd given him years ago, back when I still thought I might need rescuing someday. You good? He asked, handing me the takeout bag. I've never felt more.
Me, I said.
We ate in silence at the kitchen counter, legs dangling off the stools like teenagers. Halfway through his curry, he glanced up. You're not going to answer them?
No, I said.
They're not asking anything I haven't already answered with silence. He nodded. Later that night, around 11:47 p.m., my phone lit up again. One more message. This time from Ruben. This was cruel.
I sat with that for a while.
Let it sink in. Then typed back.
No.
What was cruel was making me believe I was family, just not enough to stay. I didn't wait for a reply. I closed the thread. I knew I wouldn't hear back. He wasn't the kind to fight when guilt got heavy. He was the kind to go quiet and let history rebrand itself. I stood, poured myself a drink, just 1 finger of bourbon, and leaned against the windowsill. Outside, the city glowed, distant and indifferent. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was mine. I whispered to the dark. I didn't burn their house. I just turned off the lights and locked the door behind me. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't even feel like victory. It felt done. I walked over to the laptop, still open, and stared at the email I had sent. Still sitting there in the sent folder like a small declaration of boundaries. I moved the cursor, hovered over the close window icon, then clicked. The screen faded to black. For a moment, my own reflection stared back at me, older than I remembered, but more solid. Not the girl who used to cry in the guest bathroom. Not the woman who bit her tongue through passive jabs.
Someone new.
Someone whole. The inbox could wait. The phone could ring all night. I wasn't going to answer. The email went out on a Monday morning. No subject line with anger. No passive-aggressive phrasing. Just a simple notice. Change of address. Please update your records. It was the most I'd said to my family in 5 days. And it would be the last for a while. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not quiet in the peaceful way, but the kind of stillness that feels unnatural, like a room that's been cleared out of furniture but still holds the echoes of old arguments. I didn't hear from Callista. No more texts from Leora. Ruben stayed as silent as ever, which was its own kind of communication. They didn't call, but they watched. I could see them watching. Not literally, but in the ways people like them always do. Through vague social media posts, shared prayers at church, quiet conversations with mutual friends. Little breadcrumbs of concern sprinkled across digital timelines to remind the world how gracious they were being during a difficult family rift. Callista posted a quote on Instagram. Grace is giving someone the apology they'll never say.
Of course she did.
Leora updated her church newsletter profile. It now included a new line. Please pray for our daughter. She's going through a confusing season. No names mentioned. As always, it was the same old tactic. Rewrite the narrative, sanitize the shame. But something inside me had shifted too far to care. I didn't even feel anger reading it. Just fatigue. That kind of fatigue you get when you finish moving out of a house and you look back at the empty rooms. Not sad, not nostalgic. Just ready to close the door. That weekend, I decided to clean my closet. Not metaphorically. Literally. I'd been meaning to go through the shelves above the hanging rod, where I kept all the boxes I never had the courage to open. The ones I carried through 2 apartments but hadn't touched since my grandmother's funeral. I pulled down the biggest box and opened it on the floor of my bedroom. Old photos.
Cards.
A few folded scarves that still smelled faintly of her lavender drawer sachets. And at the very bottom, an envelope with my name on it, written in her careful, slanted script. For Mireille. Only when you're ready. I sat back, legs crossed, the envelope trembling in my hands. I hadn't been ready at the funeral. Or during the first year after. Or the year after that. But I was ready now. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting filled the page like she was still there in the room, holding my hand the way she used to when I cried, without sound. They won't see you.
But you don't need them to.
You are not invisible. You are mine. You are Mireille, which means to be admired. Let them laugh. You carry my name. And I knew what I was doing when I gave it to you. My breath caught in my chest. No tears came at first. Just that tightness behind the eyes, like the body was holding back too much to release anything. And then it broke. The real kind of crying, the kind that doesn't come with sobs or shaking, just long exhales that leave your whole soul quieter afterward. I held the letter to my chest for a long time. Then, I framed it. It now sits on my bookshelf beside the ceramic awl she gave me when I turned 22. The one everyone else in the family said was tacky, but I loved anyway. That afternoon, I called Kalen. He picked up on the second ring. Hey, I said. Hey, he answered. Everything all right? Yeah, I said. I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. You don't have to thank me. I know. But I wanted to. We didn't talk long. I didn't want comfort. I just wanted the connection. Then I let the line go silent, and we both knew it was okay to hang up. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened a new email draft. I started typing. I forgive you, but I will not invite you back in. Some doors are not closed in anger. They're closed for warmth. I stared at the screen for a moment, then hit delete. Not because it wasn't true, but because they didn't deserve that truth handed to them so easily. Instead, I typed, change of address. Please update your records. And send it to the family thread. No reaction. No acknowledgement. That was fine. They didn't have to respond. The silence said everything. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of tea, pulled on my coat, and stepped outside. The cold hit me, sharp and honest. There was no fake warmth in the wind, no false promises in the air. But I could breathe. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for permission to exist. As I walked down the block toward the small bookstore where I used to volunteer, I thought about my grandmother. About the way she held me when I was small. About the time she baked bread just for me because everyone else had forgotten I didn't like raisins. I thought about the way she said my name. Not like it was strange or foreign, but like it was sacred. They gave me silence. But I built a life with it. Maybe family isn't where you're born. Maybe it's where no one ever has to ask what your name is. Sometimes, the loudest form of love is silence, and the greatest act of revenge is choosing peace over performance. This story wasn't about destroying a family, it was about ending a pattern. How many of us keep showing up for people who never truly see us? If you've ever felt like the invisible one at the table, maybe it's time to ask, what would happen if you walked away? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful